All right, Denny, how's it going? Again,
Not much. Sorry.
we were having this conversation last time about pronunciation, and it had me thinking actually about some of the things that I'm learning with this Delta course. I've sent
Yes.
you a few files before. Have you had a chance to look at any of these things yet?
Yes. Excuse me. I did have some time to look at challenges different people from different regions have in learning to use English. Among other topics was pronunciation and distinguishing sounds. And another book you sent me, which I had just took a very brief glance at, was how people learn their first language, how people learn second language, and different parts or elements to that,
Yeah.
among which, again, is pronunciation and discourse.
Yeah, and I sent you some class notes as well because I'm doing this Delta course, so what I call a glorified English teacher certificate, diploma, whatever. And this I thought actually there was one that sparked that made me think of you because and it's Phonology 5, Part B, these answers. One of these, because what happens in this unit, we talk about learner problems with pronunciation. And in this unit, it asks us it gives us a bunch of problems and a bunch of choices of who might make these problems. Like, is it Arabic speakers? Is it Spanish? Is it Chinese?
Ah,
And so it goes through this. And I remember you making this comment about East Asian speakers having this problem with the th,
yeah.
the variations of the th sound. So is it th or the, aspirated or not, or unaspirated and aspirated? And this made me think like this is actually maybe something we could take a look at again. Um, so this Phonology 5. So this is one of the documents. I was You mentioned this as well. So it's not just the th, but the l and the r. So
Yes.
I can actually say that a lot of the Chinese students that I've had, Chinese learners, they don't seem to mispronounce this as much as I think is commonly thought. And you said it was happening. Do you think is it as prominent as it was before, or has it improved, or am I just not hearing it anymore?
Well, I think it depends where the L and the R are in the word itself. The problem
Okay.
comes down to the fact that where our tongue is when we speak English for the L, for example, with the L, our tongue goes to the top of our mouth, the front of it
L.
behind our front teeth, L.
L. So when we
And
just say
then
the letter L,
right,
L. Yeah.
right.
Right.
And the R, our tongue curls up on the edges. It curls up and goes to the back of the mouth.
R.
However, in Chinese, the similar
Yeah.
sounds are made with the tongue flat on the bottom. And this is a
So let's see.
very big
L.
difference.
And how do you say L in
Ill.
L? L and L.
It's
Like quite L. L in
and
English,
so
L. Right.
and so
Okay.
especially when the sound is isolated, when the sound's isolated, Mandarin speakers and usually Cantonese speakers don't have a problem with it. However,
Yeah.
when it comes especially in the middle or at the end of a word, then because they because of where their tongue already is, it ruins the sound. Well, not ruins, but it
Example
makes it
that's
harder to understand.
the example given here is milk. Free milk might be pronounced flea mirk. I, I
Or
might be I'm very being very harsh on my pronunciation. I guess because I'm used to sort of enunciating in the English language. Free milk, flea mirk. Uh,
and
yeah, no, I'm butchering the transcription here, but what do you think? Does that
the
happen very often?
the classic example is fried lice instead of
Fried lice,
fried
fried lice,
rice,
fried.
right?
Yes,
And And
Right.
in fact, there was even a reference to this problem in one of the Rush Hour movies
Right. Yeah.
with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker.
That was it's been a while since I've seen that movie. Okay, so that's one of them. L and the R, the other one, the th and the. The one that I was surprised that I hear quite a bit of issues with in Chinese pronunciation. Not that I'm trying to pick on Chinese speakers, but it's where I've been teaching for a while, and
Yes,
you've taught there as well. And most of your students are still Chinese, or at least East Asian, right?
East Asian, yes.
Right. The one sound that I find that they have problem with is zh. So casual, measure, pleasure, usually, and it usually comes in that word right there when they're saying usually, because the translation of that word from Mandarin Chinese or Chinese into English happens quite a bit in spoken discourse, spoken dialect. So when you're just speaking to someone, that word gets translated quite a bit. So I was actually wondering, how do you fix this problem? Um, on this document that I sent you, number 9 here says affricates. So this is an affricate, such as, what is this? It's je and sh and je. They tend to be mispronounced as s and z, respectively, by Greek and Spanish speakers from Spain. But I would add Chinese speakers from mainland of China. Have you heard this before?
And it's the thing that puzzles me the most because they have sounds in Chinese so similar to it that even if they don't get it, zhao, for example,
Jiao. But
zhao,
that's different.
but it's
Je,
a similar,
je,
yeah,
jiao,
the ZH.
jiao. No, okay. I see what you mean. How it could sound
It,
very similar, but it's
it's
not. The
similar.
mouth movement is very different.
But it's more similar than how they typically pronounce it. And what I have found is once I break it to them like that, Chinese students like that, one on one, they don't have a problem afterwards.
Right. Oh, so you're able
Approximate
to cross the bridge, were you?
one of the few times with pronunciation, very few.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you because you are practicing as a teacher right now, and me, I'm just kind of studying as one. How do you deal with a lot of these pronunciation issues? You'd mentioned this one here with the zh. I sent you the phonemic chart, which is something that I remember, like we talked about finding this golden chart of English sounds during the CELTA uh,
Mm.
course that we both took at different times, only to find out that my students all knew this, and I was the slow learner that we as native speakers never look at this thing ever.
Right.
But there's a lot of sounds in here, and we've talked about using it before. You say no, I say maybe. Well, I say yes because it's you can give it to someone and have them understand how it can be pronounced, but only if they know how these things are pronounced.
Right.
You say no because it's one of these things where you'd rather have them just develop the word on its own rather than following a secondary chart.
And I think I should also explain the first time I was introduced to it, I was teaching in 2 high schools in Harbin. And it was 2004. And in China, the same textbook is published and essentially used everywhere across the country, the whole country.
Right.
And if there's a mistake in the book, then you have everybody in China at that age level learning the same exact mistake. And what
Oh,
happened was the word robot, robot, an automaton.
yeah.
And this, I, and from experience, I talked to different youth from just a few different areas in China about that same age, 15, 16, 17. All of them were saying Robert, Robert. But they could, once but it wasn't a problem of saying robot. That's no problem. And they said, but Denny, in the book, here, in the
Oh
book,
no.
it says, and that is why I'm so hesitant. And maybe it's because of that exact situation. It's China, everywhere it's the same. Whereas in other books, obviously, it doesn't have this mistake. And so even if a few students learn something wrong, it's easily corrected.
Right. So your fear is based on a bad textbook. Proofreading error, which, to be fair, proofreading this phonemic chart stuff, part of my Delta studies is I have to know how to do this, like to transcribe. Okay, so you popped that up on the screen there. So I have to learn how to transcribe these an English word into these sounds, and it's challenge I haven't been able to do just yet. I guess have you probably wouldn't have ever done this in your teaching. I mean, I don't remember ever doing it for people,
Uh,
especially upper level, like in university or something. Not usually.
I I saw this when I took the CELTA, and occasionally I see exercises or brain teasers with this.
Yeah,
And but that's really the extent of it. On occasion, I've had to teach pronunciation, and I know it was specific sounds, but usually I was using an American English book, which didn't use this.
yeah. And this one is supplied by the British Council, and I'm not sure if this is one of they are sort of an authority in this chart, but I think they work together with another author. Like Cambridge does a lot of this language research, and the other one, I forget the textbook or the book that talks about Sound Foundations is the title, but Adrian Underhill, I think, who wrote Sound Foundations. One of these books that I have to read for this course. But yeah, it can be daunting. I remember when I first looked at it and going, oh, so those sounds actually have meaning to them. Oh, interesting. So they are broken down into, I guess, a reasonable method. Goodness me, if I could try to uh, decode it. The top left there. So we have what? Those are vowels. So your
Yeah,
vowels, these would how would you classify those? I don't know, vowels. So
short
the
and
I,
long.
short and long, and then how they work is that with the two dots between them. So it's E and I and right. So seat, like the upper top left there, I dot dot, and then the second one, just the regular I, the capital I. I mean, I dot dot is like words in seat or green tree.
Mhm.
And then the second one, which is just a capital I there, sit, grin, fish. That's I know I sent you the screenshot of it, and I have the app open on another screen here. So people won't be able to see it. But again, so I dot dot E, seat, green, tree, and then I, sit, grin, and fish. So it comes down to where your tongue, like you mentioned before, how the tongue is sort of moving in the mouth at the time when you are saying these vowels. Um, Diphthong, which one is here? So the A and E, that one, I always thought this was an interesting character there. So two below the I dot dot, the AE, that's the
Ah,
ah,
yes.
ah, and right beside it, uh, and then uh, oh,
And something that needs to be remembered. I had a coworker in Vietnam, and she's from Australia, and she introduced herself. And in American English, we would pronounce her name as Amber. And she introduced herself. She told me her name, and then and I guess whatever sound it is, it comes from the throat. And I couldn't mimic it exactly, or apparently even really close. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, that's close enough." And so the thing is that in American English, there are some sounds, or one or two sounds I know are not in British English. Which one it is, I have no idea. I also know that within American English, different areas might be missing a sound or two.
Like, what would be missing a sound?
So, for example, caught,
Cot.
Caught, but
Right. Yeah.
also cot, the thing you sleep on.
Yeah.
How I pronounce it, they are the same sound.
Yeah.
But in some areas in the United States, they are different sounds. So I
How do
am
they?
guessing at least I can't do it.
Oh,
Okay, see,
really?
that's the thing. I can't
I
do it.
didn't know this. Caught. I caught the ball. I'm sleeping on a cot.
Yes, yeah, there's
Well, I'm Canadian,
it.
so maybe that's the problem. It's
And
same
so
pronunciation.
even with vowels, right, with consonants, usually in a language, the consonant sounds are fairly standard,
Right.
at least in English.
Oh,
It's the vowel sounds where there's a real difference.
yeah. They would be the most pronounced difference in the difference of dialects. Caught. I guess how I know what you mean because in Britain or the British accent, they might say caught. I caught the ball, and I know British people are going to laugh at my impersonation there, but I've noticed this as well. I call it elision, where they get rid of that final consonant sometimes. So it's more like I caught, and then caught. They might still say I'm sleeping on a cot, but they don't aspirate. They don't pronounce that last T. It's I see what you mean.
I have a question about that also.
Sure.
This really came up when I was living in China. In American English, when we say can't, that T is a hard T.
Yeah.
And in American English, that's fairly standard. However, apparently in British English, and I noticed this sometimes speaking or working with Britons in China or in Vietnam, the T is a lot softer.
Yeah. I can't do
And
that.
what about
I
in
can't do that.
Canada?
Canada's the same as America, man. We're trying to get our voices heard too over you shouting Americans. Ha 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 ha. I can't hear you. I can't say that. Um, I also wonder if again I might not be the best because I enunciate my words because of my industry. I'm so used to doing it at this point that going back and I know when I do go back, I talk like a textbook or like I'm talking to a foreigners all over the place sort of thing, even though I grew up in the city, right?
Right.
But yeah, I know what you mean. The British might say like I can't. They again they soften that final syllable, which for a learner picking up on that, it can be I don't. It can be distracting if they're doing both at once. Like if they did have a teacher who's pronouncing it English, but then they're going home and they're watching I don't know Monty Python, or
Right.
maybe or probably a better example, they're watching Rick and Morty American English, but
Right.
they go to class and their teacher is a middle-aged British guy, right? So that would probably be a better example of what goes on is that the American English soft culture, the American language is sort of permeating pop culture, but
Yeah.
the teachers various stripes, I guess you could call them, right? Um, but yeah, so okay, so we talked about the je sound. I'm glad that you mentioned that you were able to draw that connection between the Chinese language and that je sound, and usually, so that's over on the bottom right hand side of that chart. That looks like a number three. So that one is
Ah,
what's that?
okay.
That's the sh, and then right there, that one, sh, and then right below that's the W. So that three sound actually looks like the Cyrillic z. So this one, I'm not sure why they used that one, that symbol for it, but whenever I see that, I have to be careful not to use the Cyrillic z, like in Ukrainian z. But any other tricky ones? We've talked about the right in the middle there, the theta. So earth,
Yes.
thigh, throw, and then the one below that is a the. And so the main difference between that is when you're pronouncing the first one, the top one, the theta, the th. Your tongue is in between your teeth, but you are breathing through. And so you those words again would be like earth, thigh, or throw. Your tongue is in between your teeth, and you're breathing out at the same time. And then the letter below that, the sound below that, is they or the. So they, there, and bathe, not bath, bathe. So they, there, and bathe. Again, the tongue is in between your teeth, but this time instead of just breathing out, uh, you're shaking your vocal cords. You're kind of humming as you're pushing the air through your mouth. So they, there, and they. That's the big difference. And that one, I think, the only way that I've ever been able to help people distinguish between what we call but the theta, like the th and the s, and
Mhm.
the and the z, is practice in class, drill, repetition, with these minimal pairs that we haven't mentioned this before, but this is something that's very common in an ESL class. Yes, what were you going to say?
The real challenge I found, and this was with uh, native Chinese speakers, but also native Spanish speakers and native Japanese speakers. They are very uncomfortable getting their tongue out,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to really emphasize it. And so I overly do it just to make the point because they think getting it close enough, but not really there, is good enough, and it's not. And so I'll stick my tongue out when I'm
Yeah,
in a small class, and getting them to do it the first time is like pulling teeth.
yeah. I guess there's a little bit of an embarrassment,
Yeah,
especially Mandarin Chinese. I don't think any of the sounds require you uh,
no,
putting your tongue past your teeth. Not a lot. Like I think Spanish might be more. They would do that. Like that language does it more than
yeah,
um, Mandarin Chinese. But yeah, a lot of East Asian languages, it's a very, I would say, reserved in that sense that the tongue stays within, like behind the teeth rather than coming out in front of it.
yeah,
But the th and the s, that because that does require them to pay attention to where their tongue is placed. With th, it has to go on the teeth or in between the teeth, and then it stays behind it, and there's a little pocket of air that goes from the back of your mouth through that opening. So your teeth, your upper teeth are there, and your tongue's right like that, and the air goes
right.
right through it. So th and s, and it does require. Could you pick up on it by hearing? You'd have to be experimenting with different mouth movements on your own if you want to pick it up on your own. It's sometimes easier to be in a teacher or in a YouTube video context where someone can show you, with your mouth is like
Yes,
this, tongue for th, you put your tongue right there, and for s, you put your tongue back here, and the air goes over like through that space from the I guess it's the alveolar ridge or whatever it is, and your tongue. So s and th. Why did I say alveolar? Well, because that's actually one of these words that we're supposed to be learning for. Yes, it is alveolar fricative. That's what it's called. So that's where that ridge behind your teeth
mhm,
is what is called the alveolar ridge, and it's very prominent to talk about in this Delta course because we have to talk about mouth placement. We have to talk about phonology, mouth placement, and how to help students deal with pronunciations such as this th or s sounding. Same with the and z. So it's similar, but again, with that, I would say, humming. How would you describe that? You're humming, you're vocalizing
Yeah, your throat is vibrating and you're forcing air out
yeah, yeah.
to a
I'm sure
narrow
there's a more
area.
technical. Let's see what they say here. Certain alveolar fricatives. Certain as in sip and zip, are alveolar fricatives. They are produced as hissing sounds because air escapes with difficulty. What does it say about th? Ah, th and the are dental fricatives, as in so th and the as in moth, and that are dental fricatives because the tongue is in contact with the top teeth. The air escapes with a little friction. There you
And
go.
I just wanted to mention that this is by no means inclusive of all the languages in the world. I know I saw the phonemic chart of what is supposed to include the super majority of languages in the world, and I don't remember. There were 80, 90, 100 different
Oh, yeah.
symbols for different
It's a
sounds
lot.
that people can make. There's a lot. This is by no means uh, an
This one's
inclusive amount.
British. The chart we have up here right now by the British Council is British English specific. The American one would be
Oh,
slightly different. The Canadian one would probably be similar to the American. There might be one or two differences. I don't know.
right.
But I've never seen in all of my Chinese studies, you have the pinyin, but you don't ever have the phonemic pronunciation, which this has not hit Mandarin Chinese teaching just yet.
That I was going to ask you. Do you think it would help you if you've, well, there would be sounds that are in the Chinese phonetic alphabet that aren't included in the English. But do you think it would help you if you knew the vocabulary? Would it,
Well,
could you use that to help
I think I
position your
could.
tongue?
I think this is a necessary step. Like, I am surprised that um, Mandarin Chinese education, language education, hasn't taken this step to make the language more accessible. I know that Pinyin does help, that bridges one gap, but one thing I realized is that when you first come to China, they do have so at the airport, especially, they have different translations of these words. And as my Chinese got better, I understood how these words were either being transcribed or translated. And I noticed that when it was from Chinese to Russian, the sounds that they were using in Russian would match up with what they should be in Chinese. So since I knew the Cyrillic alphabet, I'd read it and go, oh, yes, there's a connection there in terms of pronunciation. But when they transliterated it into English, for example, ZH, SH, the zh sounding, which exists in Russian or Cyrillic, but not so much in Chinese. Again, with having it transliterated from Chinese to Russian made sense, but then going from Chinese to English, you're going, how do you pronounce that ZH, that SH, or the Q, the Qi, Ji, those two sounds, especially in Mandarin Chinese. But again, in Russian, in Cyrillic, they could better transcribe it, transliterate it. So in that case, it was easier since I knew that. But if they had this phonemic chart for Mandarin Chinese pronunciation, yeah, I think it would be helpful to a lot of people, not just me.
Looking back at when I had studied German in college or or Spanish in high school or things like that. I was never exposed to anything like this either when I was studying German, Spanish. What about you? When you were studying Ukrainian or Russian?
Never, never, never.
I wonder if,
This was an exclusive CELTA
but
disclosure.
I wonder if English is a little unusual in that using the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, is the only language where it's readily used in teaching it as a second language.
Yes.
I have no idea.
Okay. See, yeah. So this is a good. I understand what you mean, because if we were to go to for example, if we went to France or to Russia or even to parts of Ukraine, where they would be teaching Russian as a second language rather than as a foreign language, which is a different concept. It's a similar idea, right, but the idea being that as a second language, you're in the country and maybe you are functional in the language, but you speak another language natively, right? So you might speak, I don't know, Swahili natively, but you're working and studying in, or working and living in Russia, and so you're learning Russian as a foreign language or as a second language, depending on what you're sort of aiming for, I guess. I guess the easiest way, teaching English as a second language would be more, you're in the country. No, you're out of the country, but teaching English as a foreign language, you're out of the country. Does that make sense? I'm digressing here, I know that.
No, I think you had it right the first time. I think it really depends on purpose. Usually, I have a lot of experience teaching English also in America for immigrants. And
right,
so the difference between ESL, English as a second language, and English as a foreign language is more like what you had said earlier. What is your purpose or motives? If you're outside one of the native speaking countries, then usually we think of it as being as a foreign language situation.
right.
Even if you're using English in the workplace. Now, if that really dominates your time, and maybe your outside work time also is dominated in English, then yeah, maybe it is a second language, even though.
Yeah.
And if you're living in one of the countries that uses English predominantly, then it is, and you need it to survive, then it's more like a second language than a foreign language. But
I know there's, yep. I never did answer your question. So the question again was whether or not
learning other languages uses the IPA.
Right. If we were doing that, I think Russian might do that. I'm not sure about French, but very good question. So where I was going with that before I horribly digressed, which I've gotten after you for before. But if we were in the countries studying those languages as foreign languages, it might be the idea that we don't know anything about the language. So we need to be building up from the very basics and understand how the words are actually made, how the sounds are actually made. For all of my language efforts, I never saw a phonemic chart like this for any other language. It was never even, it was never talked about. It was only repetition. It was drills. We were given very simple words, and very simple words with the like a picture. So kind of like how this phonemic chart is very stark, very bare bones, very stoic, because it doesn't give you any other indication of what the sound could be, no examples or anything, and it's meant to be that. Whereas in other languages that I've studied, there's always an association of a sound with a letter and with a word and with a picture. So there's 4 components in that one thing. This phonemic chart, one of the reasons, and we've talked about this before, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to associate a picture or a word with one of these sounds, because, as you mentioned with your textbook example, that can be one problem. But the other is that dialects might not pronounce the same word in the same way. So it's very difficult to have a picture that could be spoken in one way, in one place, in one part of the world, and then spoken another way in a different part of the world. So that's why this phonemic chart, this English phonemic chart, is given in such a very bare bones manner of just here are the characters, and you can practice the sounds, the sounds behind them, and then it's up to you to find the words that match that.
And on that exact thing, what do you think about? I had met a Scotsman who was teaching English at a high school in China. And unfortunately, he was from a fairly remote area of Scotland. And his students really couldn't understand him.
Did
And
you?
To be honest, sometimes it was a challenge.
Yeah.
After a while, after speaking to him a few times, extended conversation, it got easier. But still sometimes I'd still have to ask for clarification.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I understand when people or schools are very selective about pronunciation teachers. It needs to be, generally speaking, understandable by most people who use the language, I think.
Yeah, and I know I'm teasing the Scotsman. I've met a few of them as well, and they great accent. It's just that I think one of the things that I've found when I meet someone, particularly from Scotland or from Ireland, who can have very pronounced dialects, accents, but also Southern United States people with that drawl, that heavy Texan drawl, where it can be like, I think I know what you said. That's one way to say it, I guess. So that I've noticed sometimes I do have to, there's a little bit of time that even I have to give myself before I fully understand their accent and their way of speaking.
Well, the usually for people from Texas or from the South, it's a little bit slower. And usually it's not, the problem is not that the pronunciation is a little clear, it's a little bit slower, but especially Creole in New Orleans. New Orleans was originally a French city. And
Right.
the mixture of French, Caribbean, and English there, that people from New Orleans to today still have this combination. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, if you grow up there, usually you have it. That could be a challenge for
What would be a
Americans.
pronounced? What would be an example of that? What words or like phrasings?
I can't do it. See, that's the thing. I can't
Well,
do
which
it.
word would be sort of most indicative that someone is from this area? Is there some word that they
The way
typically?
that they pronounce the word New Orleans or New
New
Orleans.
Orleans. Okay.
Right.
New
It's just
Orleans.
the name
Do
of the
you say
city
New Orleans
itself.
or New Orleans?
Um, I use both, I guess, without
Well, because
really
you're from
thinking.
the States. I say New Orleans. Same with I say Missouri, not Missouri,
My
which is
great,
a little different. Yeah.
no, and I grew up in Kansas, which is right next to Missouri. And my great grandmother and grandfather were from Washington, Kansas, but they would add an R. And so it become Washington, Kansas. They would have an
Washington.
R right after the W. And this is a very Kansan and Nebraska kind of thing. Does that happen in central Canada too? Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, you add an R to the W, or
No,
is that
I
more
can't
just the
think of it.
plains in America?
In Saskatchewan, I know the only thing that I've sort of found a peculiar that they're sort of ridiculed for. It's pointed out that they say a. Yeah, you know a. They seem to end a lot of their sentences with a. So that's the one sort of feature of Plains English, especially Saskatchewan. Other places, I mean, there's slight differences. I think the biggest difference in Canadian accents would be from the East Coast, like on the Atlantic, where they start some of the words that they use, and again, like you, I'd be hesitant to try because I wouldn't be getting it right. But I know that on the East Coast that they do say words a little bit differently than would be said in Toronto, than would be said in a place like Winnipeg, or even as far as west as Vancouver. I think Vancouver would be very similar to Seattle. Although I don't know, I've
Yeah.
met a few people from Seattle, and they seem to be, I don't know, it seems like they're very relaxed people, and that comes across in their spoken language. And I think that's kind of like Vancouver, but I'm not entirely sure. It's more their tone of voice than it is their exact pronunciation.
Sure. Sure.
So I guess we've looked at quite a bit today with the delta, this phonemic chart, student concern. Okay, that would be a good question. Do you think, since you're the active teacher at the moment, what should students care about this? Like, is this at all pertinent? Something they should care about?
Yes, certainly to an extent. During the
To what?
coronavirus times, I spent about a month in Dubai, and I met a lot of people from Africa, both East and West Africa, uh, plenty of people from the Arab countries, India, and I could understand most of them. And they had learned English in a way to be able to communicate there. But there were things that they generally got fairly accurate. Like I mentioned before, the consonant sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Usually with context, you get the consonants and your vowel sounds are okay. It's manageable. Now, if your job requires it, you're giving presentations, people rely on being able to understand you quickly, readily. There's no better accent. And in fact, it's fine to have an accent, but your first language should not interfere with your pronunciation. That is what you should strive for, really, unless you're an actor.
Wow, I've made that argument before that actors do it all the time, but they go through special training to deal with it. And it's like one sentence, action, say it, cut, move on. Oh, there was one thing I was going to look up before I let you go. The L and the R, because I'm looking at this terminology. I found what the terminology for it. So the L is a lateral approximant liquid. L is as in lead, and bill is a voiced lateral or lateral approximant. The tongue tip touches the alveolar ridge, but the sides of the tongue are lowered so air can escape along the sides of the tongue. Post-alveolar liquid. R, as in road, is a post-alveolar. The tongue curls back into the mouth, but does not touch the roof of the mouth. So there's the highfalutin way of describing what the L and the R are in terms of pronunciation. And these are the words that I have to learn. I had to make sure I got that in there just so we could be thorough in our examination of it. Because my focus has been this Delta program, and you're in the classroom at the moment. You're teaching students pronunciation and intonation and all these things. For me, we have to look at this stuff and have develop this understanding of how to break down pronunciation issues, specifically not just in a classroom setting, but if, for example, during on the Delta exam, we are given a script and it's been transcribed. So it'll be a spoken passage, and they will give us phonemic transcriptions. And we have to be able to read that and understand where the speaker might be making some mistakes or mispronouncing the vowels or dropping the T's. Now, dropping the consonants, that wouldn't be such a big problem. It would be whether or not they are doing connected speech properly. So if they're
Right.
so that comes down to like liaison and ellipsis, where we sort of drop either consonants or different letters, or we crash them all together and make them into one sound sort of thing. Like you can pay is the one that I came across. You can pay. It comes across more as you and then KEMPEI. So can pay. It almost makes an M sound.
Right.
I argue it doesn't. I argue as a Canadian that you can pay, that you're actually liaisoning the first two. You can pay. So you can becomes one word, and then pay becomes the second word with the stress on that. So this is what I'm looking at in my my Delta terminology here.
Right.
I see you thinking about it. What's your interpretation of that?
I would agree with you. In American English, we would probably contract the sounds for you can,
You can,
like I just did, very
right, and
naturally, and then pay.
you
Yes,
can
I
pay,
wouldn't
and so
contract
there's a
it to,
stop.
yeah,
Yeah, and
you can pay.
I think I would make that made sense because you can pay. You can. I can't do it with the British pronunciation. That I wonder if they do that.
You can
Uh,
pay.
if Yeah, I don't know. We'd have to get one of our British fellows to say it for us. Whether the stress would change in the sentence as well, right? But you can. I
Yeah.
would say you can. That if someone were to listen to that and hear it and go, you can. Is that two words, or is it a place name, or what is it?
Yeah, if I heard it just isolated, I'd have to think maybe, like you said, it's the name of a city or it's a family name. I wouldn't think it's you
Yeah,
can.
yeah. You can pay. You can pay. So yeah. See, for me, I mean, again, if I were to transcribe that phonemically, it would be you can together, and then pay would be separate. But again, being in the ESL industry, maybe I've done away with a lot of my connected speech that's so natural to other people.
But the point is to make sure you're understood.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, so all right, that was a pretty good discussion in terms of phonology. I think, I mean, I learned something at least about how to help Chinese students get that zh sound.
And I learned why I'm grateful I'm not studying for the Delta.
The delta. Well, give it time. Who knows? It seems it's not a bad program. It's a lot of reading that
Oh,
I probably should have done anyway if I wanted to improve. But I think you being in the classroom, I find myself going more towards not being in the classroom anymore, to tell you the truth.
and and that wasn't a slight against the Delta. It's just like learning that vocabulary that you were explaining, the lateral, how, what,
The what was it again? Shoot, I don't know. Quick, find the file. Find the file. Lateral approximant.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know the
Approximate, like
word
approximately,
lateral.
approximate.
I know the word lateral. I know the word approximate. I don't know why
What?
that means the sound L.
Liquid too. In parentheses, it's liquid. Lateral approximant parentheses liquid. Okay, I don't know. This is
Wonderful.
one of the things that they do make very clear in the Delta course is that this stuff you might not use in the classroom, like ever. Right? And I think especially if a student came in talking like this, I'd be like, all right, don't, nope, nah, none of that. Either I would just tell them, nope, none of that, or I'd be like, can we write that down and then I could see what you mean because I have no idea what that is. And I think this. I mean, I don't think I'm unique being an educator like this, where
Yeah.
some student comes in with some very highly technical question, and you're sitting there going, I know what you're talking about, but can we talk like humans rather than like a textbook? Because that's where a lot of that stuff is learned, is that they get into it and they study it and they want to learn everything about it, which is great. But on the street with your teachers, with your presenters, with your colleagues, if you start dropping words like lateral approximate liquid, I don't know how many conversations you're going to have with people.
Linguists.
Linguists, yeah, that's it. I mean, okay, and if you want to do that, you're absolutely, but maybe not in the workplace.
Right.
Again, context
Exactly.
depends. All right. Well, thanks very much for your time, Denny. Very enlightening as always. And we will talk again.
Likewise.
Have a good one.
Sure. See
Bye
you
bye.
later. Bye.